birthday party and dropped a claim that froze the air. "Lucas isn't Travis's son," she announced. "He's Mark's child. Mark, my only son, had been gone for barely 3 months." She didn't stop there. She produced a folded document she said was Mark's updated will, leaving half of his $800,000 house to Lucas. Guests gasped. I stayed quiet, holding back a smile I knew would look out of place, because I already had proof locked away that would shatter her story completely. My name is Helen Carpenter. I'm 61 years old, a widow for more than a decade, and the mother of 2 children, my late son Mark, and my daughter Rebecca. Mark was my rock-disciplined, generous man who built a career as a corporate attorney. He had a way of remembering the details about people others forgot: the barista's name at his coffee shop, the guard at his building's front desk. He died suddenly from a brain aneurysm, leaving a hole in my life I still can't describe. Melissa, his wife, entered our family 5 years ago. On the surface she was warm and sociable, but I often sensed distance beneath the charm. She and Mark had a marriage that looked fine from the outside, but he'd confided to me more than once that things were strained. She had expensive tastes, a constant need for more, and a way of making every problem about money. When Lucas was born, I embraced him wholeheartedly, but I also knew that Travis, Melissa's old boyfriend, had been around not long before she met Mark. Rumors of overlap between the relationships had reached my ears, though I kept them to myself. On the day of Lucas's birthday, I walked into that backyard with a wrapped gift and a quiet resolve to survive the gathering. I wasn't expecting my daughter-in-law to stand up in front of family and friends, rewrite my son's history, and use his memory as leverage. But I also knew this: she had no idea what I'd been keeping safe ever since Mark's surgery 2 years earlier. Before that birthday, the dynamic between Mark and Melissa had been a quiet balancing act. Mark was steady, pragmatic, and cautious with money. Melissa was spontaneous, charming in social settings, and perpetually reaching for a lifestyle just out of their means. I learned early on to tread carefully around her, offering help with Lucas but avoiding too much involvement in their finances or decisions. Mark and I talked openly. About a year into their marriage, he admitted that Melissa often pushed for bigger purchases: a remodeled kitchen, luxury vacations, a new SUV, even when it didn't make sense. "She's never satisfied for long," he told me one Sunday afternoon over coffee. "If I say no, she finds another way to get it." 2 years before his death, Mark had surgery for a medical condition he'd been quietly dealing with for months. The doctors recommended performing a vasectomy during the same procedure to prevent future complications. It wasn't an easy decision, but after consulting specialists, he agreed. I was the one who drove him home from the hospital, made him soup, and kept him company during his recovery. We told no one outside of his doctor and his attorney, Richard Hale. Mark was meticulous. He updated his will with Richard immediately after the surgery, making sure it reflected his current wishes. He also kept a file of personal notes, including times Melissa had pressed him for money or reacted badly when he set boundaries. He didn't accuse her of outright deceit, but he wanted things documented just in case. When Lucas was born less than a year later, the timeline didn't escape me. Melissa claimed Mark was the father, and he accepted the role without question, determined to give the baby a stable home. But I knew and he knew the biology didn't match. We never confronted her. Mark said it was easier to focus on raising Lucas than to fight about paternity. By the time of his sudden death, I thought the matter was behind us. What I didn't realize was that Melissa still saw Mark's assets as a solution to her problems, and she was willing to use Lucas as the key to unlock them. 3 months after Mark's passing, I was still moving through each day as though wrapped in fog. The grief was heavy, but I kept my promise to be present for Lucas. When the invitation for his first birthday arrived, my instinct was to decline. Balloons, cake, and small talk felt like too much, but I could almost hear Mark's voice saying, "Family first, Mom." So I wrapped a gift, put on a dress he'd always said he liked, and drove across town. Melissa's rented bungalow was buzzing when I arrived. Music floated out from the backyard, mingling with the scent of grilled food. Blue balloons and streamers crisscrossed the small living room. I spotted my parents sitting stiffly at a picnic table, their smiles tight, eyes darting toward the house. Melissa emerged from the kitchen holding Lucas, who looked adorable in a little bow tie. Her hair was freshly highlighted, her makeup flawless, her dress new. She placed Lucas in his high chair, tapped a spoon against her cup, and the chatter faded. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Lucas's special day," she began, her tone unusually formal. This past year has been full of challenges and surprises, and there's something I've kept to myself until now. I felt my shoulders tense. My mother's gaze dropped to her lap. A knot formed in my stomach. Lucas isn't Travis's son, Melissa said, looking straight at me. He's Mark's child. Gasps and whispers rippled through the guests. Melissa continued, Mark and I had a difficult time in our marriage, but he always promised to care for his son. Before he died, he updated his will. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. This states Lucas should inherit half the house. Every head turned toward me. The sympathy, the curiosity, even judgment flickered in their expressions. I kept my face neutral, though my pulse hammered in my ears. I knew exactly how impossible her claim was. And I also knew the evidence to prove it had been sitting in my bank's safe deposit box for the past 2 years. I didn't argue with her in that moment. Let her have her stage, I thought. The truth was on my side, and rushing to defend myself in front of half the neighborhood would only feed the spectacle. So I smiled faintly, told her we could discuss it later, and stayed until the cake was cut before quietly slipping out. The next morning, I drove straight to the bank. The branch manager, who had known Mark since he was a teenager, greeted me with a somber nod and led me to the small private room where safe deposit boxes were opened. My hands were steady as I turned the key and slid the metal drawer onto the table. Inside was the file Mark and I had assembled after his surgery. The first item was his legitimate will notarized, properly filed, and leaving everything to me, with provisions for charitable donations we'd discussed for years. Next were the medical records from the urologist, clear documentation of the procedure, the vasectomy, and the follow-up tests confirming its success. The dates were 2 full years before Lucas was born. There was also a slim leather-bound notebook. Mark's handwriting filled its pages, neat and methodical. In it, he had recorded dates and details of conversations with Melissa, times she'd pressed for money, hinted at selling the house, or become angry when he refused. There were no accusations, just facts. Document everything he told me, not because I expect trouble, but because I'd rather be ready. At the bottom of the box was a sealed envelope with my name written in Mark's steady script. I opened it slowly. Mom, the letter began, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. You've always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, but not everyone deserves it. If Melissa ever tries to use Lucas to claim part of the house, remember this file. Use it to protect yourself and protect the truth. I trust you to do what's right. I sat for a long moment, absorbing his words. Mark hadn't predicted every detail, but he'd anticipated enough to leave me armed for exactly this moment. I closed the box, took the documents I needed, and stepped back into the sunlight with a renewed sense of purpose. It was time to call Richard Hale. Richard Hale picked up on the second ring. His voice, calm but concerned, asked me to come to his office that afternoon. When I arrived, I laid everything on the table: the forged will Melissa had presented, Mark's legitimate will, the medical records, and the letter he'd left me. Richard studied the forged document, shaking his head. The legal language is sloppy. The signature is a poor imitation. This would crumble under scrutiny, but let's find out why she's doing this. He recommended bringing in Frank Dalton, a retired police detective turned private investigator who had handled delicate family disputes before. Frank had a broad build, sharp eyes, and a straightforward manner. He listened without interruption as I recounted the party, the claim, and my history with Melissa. When I finished, he said, if she's willing to commit fraud in public, there's pressure behind it. Let's find out what it is. 3 days later, Richard called me back. Frank was already in the conference room when I walked in, a thin stack of papers in front of him. It's not good, he said without preamble. Melissa was drowning in debt, over $70,000 spread across credit cards, personal loans, and medical bills for Lucas's heart surgery. She was 4 months behind on rent, with a formal eviction notice giving her until the end of the month to pay or leave. Frank slid a document across the table, the eviction filing from her landlord. As for Travis, the man listed on Lucas's birth certificate, he had vanished shortly after the birth. He'd moved to Seattle with a new girlfriend, sending sporadic child support payments of about $200 when he sent anything at all. Frank's background check revealed an outstanding warrant in New Hampshire for unpaid child support for another child. Then Frank placed a series of printed text messages between Melissa and a friend named Jenna, the same woman who'd opened the door at the party. In them, Melissa wrote, if I play this right, I can get half the house. Dave's fixing the will now found Mark's signature online from a charity auction program. Looks totally legit. Helen's always had everything. Time for me to get my share. The words were like ice water. This wasn't grief clouding judgment. It was a plan, deliberate, calculated, and cruel. Melissa was trying to rewrite the truth about my son to solve her own financial crisis. And now I had the proof to stop her. I didn't want to drag the entire family into a public fight, but I also couldn't let Melissa think her plan might work. The day after Frank's report landed in my hands, I called her. "We need to talk," I said. "Just you and me. Tomorrow, 2:00 at my house." Her tone was light, almost smug. "I figured you'd come around. See you then." I prepared the living room carefully, 2 chairs facing each other with a coffee table between them. On the table, a water pitcher, 2 glasses, my folder of documents. Richard had advised me to record the conversation legally, with Melissa's consent so I could protect myself if she tried to twist the story later. When the doorbell rang at exactly 2, Melissa stepped in wearing a fitted blazer and heels, her hair perfectly styled. She glanced at the setup and raised an eyebrow. "I'd like to record our conversation," I said, "just so we both have a clear record." "Fine," she replied, settling into the chair. "This shouldn't take long." I started the recorder, noting the date, time, and her consent. "Tell me," I said evenly, "exactly what you believe happened between you and Mark." She didn't hesitate. According to her, she and Mark had reconnected emotionally during a rough patch in their marriage. She claimed he'd confessed to doubts about their future, and that they'd shared a night together that resulted in Lucas. "He didn't want to tell you," she said, "because Lucas was born with a heart condition. He didn't want to add stress." When she finished, I leaned forward. "Melissa, 2 years before Lucas was born, Mark had surgery. During that procedure he had a vasectomy. It was successful, confirmed by follow-up tests. He couldn't have fathered any child after that." Her face paled. "You could have faked those records." "They're not fakes," I replied. "Dr. Weiss will testify to their authenticity." I placed Mark's legitimate will on the table. "This is the real will, witnessed and notarized. Your document is a forgery, a felony." Then I laid down the printouts of her text messages with Jenna, and Frank's full report on her debts and eviction notice. She stared at the papers, the fight draining from her posture. Finally, her eyes welled. "I didn't know what else to do," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm out of money. I'm losing the house. I thought this was the only way to keep Lucas safe." I let her words hang in the air before answering. "You don't protect a child by destroying his father's memory," I said. "You've crossed a line. Now you have a choice. You can come clean, or we can let the legal system handle it." Melissa's eyes darted between the stack of evidence and my face. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the water glass but didn't drink. "If I go to the police myself, will it help?" she asked quietly. "That depends on how honest you are," I replied. "But understand this, once you admit you forged that will, there's no undoing it. You'll have to live with that choice." She slumped back in her chair, her confidence gone. I never wanted it to go this far. "Jenna's boyfriend knows a guy who can fix documents. She said it would look so real no one could challenge it. I thought I could get enough money to cover the debts and keep Lucas's treatment going. I wasn't thinking about what it would do to you." Her voice cracked on the last sentence, but I didn't rush to comfort her. I thought of Mark, how hard he'd worked to build a life of integrity, how fiercely he'd valued honesty. This lie was not just about money, it was an attack on his memory. "I'm not here to negotiate over your debts," I said. "I'm here to protect my son's legacy. And I'm not going to let Lucas grow up believing a story that isn't true." Melissa wiped at her face. "What do you want me to do?" "First," I said, "you're going to sign a sworn statement that your will is a forgery, and that Mark is not Lucas's biological father. Second, you're going to return every copy of that document. Third, you're going to agree to supervised visits for now, until we know you're stable, and not making reckless choices." She nodded, silent tears running down her cheeks. I slid the prepared statement toward her. Richard had drafted it the night before, anticipating this moment. Melissa hesitated, then picked up the pen. Her signature looked small and fragile on the page, nothing like the confident posture she'd walked in with. When she handed it back, I placed it in the folder with the rest of the evidence. "I'll hold on to this," I said. "But if you try anything like this again, I won't hesitate to involve law enforcement." Melissa stood slowly, avoiding my eyes. "I'm sorry, Helen," she whispered, and then she left, her heels clicking against the hardwood in a rhythm that sounded more like retreat than departure. I sank into the chair, the silence in the room suddenly heavy. The battle wasn't over, there were still legal steps to take, and trust to rebuild, but the first major threat to my son's name had been stopped. The days after our confrontation felt strangely quiet. I'd half expected Melissa to call in a rage or try some last-minute maneuver, but she didn't. Instead, I received a brief email from her attorney confirming that she would not be pursuing any claims against Mark's estate. Richard moved quickly to file the sworn statement with the probate court, along with the real will. The judge reviewed everything and signed off on closing the case. Just like that, Mark's name was safe, his true wishes honored. Lucas remained the hardest part of all of this. He was only 6, far too young to understand the mess the adults around him had created. I made sure to send him little care packages, books, puzzles, his favorite snacks through a neutral third party. I didn't want to punish him for his mother's choices, but I also needed time to rebuild a foundation of truth before I could welcome him back into my home. One afternoon, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with Mark's old photo albums spread out before me. There he was, grinning in his Little League uniform, holding his first car keys, standing tall in his college graduation gown. He'd worked so hard to be a good man. Losing him was already unbearable. Having his memory smeared had been like losing him twice. As I turned the pages, I realized something important. Melissa's actions, while hurtful, had not succeeded. She had underestimated me, thinking grief would cloud my judgment. But grief, I'd learned, can also sharpen your sense of what truly matters. It can make you fierce in ways you never imagined. I called my friend Denise that evening. I've decided to set up a scholarship fund, I told her. For kids like Lucas, those facing serious health challenges. We'll name it after Mark. That's beautiful, Denise said. You're turning something ugly into something that will help others. And she was right. Melissa's lie had forced me into a battle I never wanted, but it also pushed me to define my priorities. Protecting Mark's name was one. Making a difference in the lives of children was another. The first donation came from me, of course. But soon, neighbors, friends, and even distant relatives contributed. By the end of the year, we had enough to help 3 families. As for Melissa, she stayed quiet. I hoped, for Lucas's sake, that she would rebuild her life with honesty at its core. Whether or not she did was beyond my control. What I could control was my own path forward, rooted in truth, fueled by love, and steady enough to weather whatever storms might come next. Looking back, I see now that this wasn't just about a forged will or a false claim of paternity. It was about a test of my boundaries, my strength, and my commitment to protecting what matters most. When you lose someone you love, the grief can make you vulnerable. People might mistake your silence for weakness, your kindness for naivety. But those moments are when you must remember that love isn't just about giving, it's also about safeguarding. Melissa's deception could have cost Mark's legacy and rewritten the truth for an innocent child. By standing my ground, I not only defended my son's name but also drew a clear line. No one has the right to rewrite our family's history for personal gain. If you're facing something similar, whether it's a legal fight, a betrayal, or a manipulation cloaked in family ties, remember this: you are allowed to set boundaries, to demand honesty, and to act in the best interest of those who can't defend themselves. Grief will always leave a scar, but scars can be reminders of battles you've won. And sometimes, winning doesn't mean crushing your opponent, it means preserving your dignity, your truth, and your peace. Mark is gone, but his name stands untarnished. Lucas will grow up one day and learn the truth, not from rumors or forged papers, but from the integrity with which I chose to live. To anyone listening, honor your loved ones not only by cherishing their memory but by protecting it fiercely when it's threatened. And if this story has touched you, share it, because someone out there may need to hear